शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनोत्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणीश्वरं गुरुवरम् योगासनाध्यासितम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षातात्मरूपे भाति हृदि विषमनसा चिन्वतामच्युतव पवनचलनरोधात् आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्. Namo Ramana. We will commence the Friday Atma Vichara session by listening to Bhagavan's Upadesham. We'll be, as usual, reading from Ramana Answers Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950, a compilation of all the answers given by Bhagavan on Atma Vichara, and the compilation is done by our founder, President Sri A.R. Ramananjali. After reading the question and answer for this week, we will contemplate on the answer given by His grace, and then have a 20 minutes Atma Vichara session. Following that, we will have our President Sharda Akka talking about Atma Vichara as it has been discussed in Ramana Gita, as it has been documented in Ramana Gita. And then finally, we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. In this week's question, which we are looking from the segment 1936 to 1950, the question number is 19. The devotee asks, how is one to destroy the ego? The question is, how is one to destroy the ego? To which Bhagavan says, the ego is like one's shadow thrown on the ground. If one attempts to bury it, it will be foolish. The self is only one. If limited, it is the ego. If unlimited, it is infinite and is the reality. Worlds are different from one another and numerous, but the ocean is only one. Similarly, the ego are many, whereas the self is one and only one. When told that you are not the ego, realize the reality. Why do you still identify yourself with the ego? It is like saying, don't think of the monkey while taking medicine. It is impossible. Similarly, when the real is mentioned, why do you continue to repeat Shivoham or Aham Brahmasmi without tracking and understanding its significance? It is not enough to repeat the bare words or think of them. Reality is simply the loss of the ego. destroy the ego by seeking its identity. Because the ego is no entity, it will automatically vanish and reality will shine forth by itself. This is the direct method, whereas all other methods are done only retaining the ego. In those paths, there arises so many doubts, and the eternal question remains to be tackled finally. But in this method, the final question is the only one, and it is raised from the very beginning. No sadhanas are necessary for engaging in this quest. We will look at it, Bhagavan's answer, in two parts. The first part, Bhagavan says, the ego is like one's shadow thrown on the ground. If one attempts to bury it, it will be foolish. The self is only one. If limited, it is the ego. If unlimited, it is finite and is the reality. If unlimited, it is infinite and is the reality. So in the first portion, Bhagavan here is saying, if the question is asked how to destroy the ego, and if there are attempts made to tackle that, to destroy the ego, Bhagavan is saying that it is doing this exercise without understanding it is the ego itself trying to destroy. It is the ego itself which is disturbed by its own thing, and therefore it is trying to destroy itself. It's as though one's shadow is thrown on the ground and one is attempting to bury it. The moment we bury it, if I place my hand on top of my shadow, so as to bury it, we can very much see that the shadow comes superimposed over the hand. Likewise, whatever I use, whatever tools I use to bury the shadow, we see the shadow will appear on top of that tool. It's the same way. Whatever attempts are being made is made by the ego itself to bury it. And therefore, how much ever it tries to bury, it will only find itself in its new avatar, in its new way of trying to bury or claiming that I have buried something, or having a new concept of it. So this is what Bhagavan is saying here to all of us. Therefore, then what should one do? Should we then leave the ego as it is? What should one do becomes the question. The reason why we always find that the ego is not destroyed by any sadhana is also because of the same reason. The sadhana is being done by the ego, and he is still given the reality, kept intact to do the sadhana, and then one goes on doing the sadhana. And by the virtue of some sadhana, let us say even if simple sadhana of exercise, if I do every day, by the virtue of that, I will have a physical fitness a little better than somebody else. And I may claim it is because of me that my efforts and things like that. It is like the same way, even in the subtler areas, the ego does the sadhana and has a better control over the mind, our thoughts and everything, or it might have got rid of certain troubling things or transcended it. Like if one time money was very important for oneself, and sometime due to the virtue of the sadhana, now if that thoughts don't disturb oneself, one may conclude that I have overcome the desire of money. But who is the one who is claiming it? So this, in all this path, because the sadhana is done by the ego, whatever it transcends, now the new image is superimposed on it. And it's like similar to the shadow superimposing on the tool. And we find that the new image, the new claim that I have transcended over money can become a hindrance, can become something like a bothering for us. Let's say I may claim that I have transcended the desire for money and somebody wanted to give me or owed me a huge amount, and he will say, now that you are transcended or gets to know that you are doing the spiritual path doesn't pay, then I may again, my thoughts may rise in that direction. So we can never say with the ego that we can transcend the ego. That's what Bhagavan is saying here. The only time when the ego is destroyed is only when it is merged in the self. When the self, when the silence of the self is completely absorbed, when it completely absorbs this claiming or non-claiming entity, or whatever way we can say, the thought process or the claiming that I have done this, I have not done this, the entire thought is absorbed in that silence of the self. Then in that state alone, we can say that in that state of silence alone, we can say that there is no ego, but there is nobody else to make that claim either. Therefore, that state is the only state which is there. Since that is the only state which is there, because that is the only state which is there between any two thoughts also, because a thought rises and when it subsides, and then before the next thought rises, what is there is that silence only. So it is only the substratum, the silence of the self which is there. Everything else seems to come and go. The screen of the self is always the one on which all this movie is being played out. Therefore, to claim through the movie that I have transcended the limitations of the movie or anything is as good as still giving reality to the objects that are appearing or not appearing, but not look at the screen on which everything is being played. So therefore, any attempt to bury the shadow or any attempt to use the ego to transcend the ego, it looks very foolish, says Bhagavan here. The self is only one. There is only one self, one awareness, one silence that is there, one presence that is there. Therefore, in that awareness, there may be multiple bubbles. In the next paragraph, Bhagavan says, if there one self is like the big ocean, that one awareness is the big thing in which there may be a limited many awarenesses claiming as Dilip or claiming as somebody else, then all of that is not real. It is like the bubble that has arisen out of the water. It was the water alone that is the main thing which is there. Likewise, this entire thing is in one's awareness. The simplest way to recognize that is by dream. In my dream, all the characters, all the worlds that I have created are only me. Though in the dream it appears that the world is separate, I am separate, the other characters that appeared in the dream is separate, and we may make a claim that I said this, that person said this, though all that conversation was only because of my own mind. That way, that habit of limiting oneself to an identity and making everything else as others is the main reason that even in dream, though everything is oneself, we don't recognize it as oneself, but still continue to recognize that whatever characters are appearing in the dream are all different people. Therefore, it is the same mistake that we do whenever the mind is active, whether it is waking or in dream. So instead of recognizing one presence, one awareness, one silence that is there, But to claim that it is my awareness, my presence, and my silence, and limit that unlimited to oneself is the ego, says Bhagavan. And with holding that identity, that I am this body, so this I am this Dilip, then I will do a sadhana to recognize the unlimited. Is like burying the shadow, says Bhagavan. The moment whatever we do in holding on to this identity that I am the ego, and as we looked at it earlier, whatever new sadhana I do and whatever new accomplishment I get, this same ego will claim that I did this sadhana and therefore I have this new accomplishment, and that becomes its new identity, its new avatar. And therefore, Bhagavan is saying this whole effort looks very foolish. So, what should one do? Therefore, Atma Vichara, says Bhagavan. To who, when I say it is for me, the ego, whom do I refer to as I? When we really inquire, then we see that this ego entity, the I thought, it's just a simple thought. It is not what we are really referring to. And if I am referring to the body again is not saying I, therefore it is not the real I. So whom do I really refer to as I? When I inquire, really trace the source back, then only we feel, and more deeper we go trying to find the source, then the unlimited, the presence, the awareness, and the silence of oneself, where there is no division, and therefore there is no limitation. Therefore, the unlimited, the infinite is found, and in that all the limited is absorbed. When it is reached there, it is all absorbed. Therefore, the infinite is experienced, and that is the reality. And that is the way to destroy the ego, says Bhagavan through this first paragraph. We will look at it again next week in the next couple of paragraphs, in which Bhagavan beautifully is guiding us that in that silence alone of the self, that the destruction of the ego can happen, not by any intellectual understanding, not by any sadhana. And therefore, the only sadhana to ask, to whom is this thought? Who am I? And every limited identity creeps up, is the best course to get back to the unlimited, get back to the reality. And that is the best way to destroy the ego which tries to creep up in the form of a limited thought. And by repeated practice, Bhagavan says that all the limitation would be understood as the only way that the trouble is getting raised, and one would start to enjoy or start to abide in that unlimited reality of oneself. By repeatedly doing so, then all these imaginative limitations will be let go on, or the reality to them will not be given anymore. The more and more reality will be attributed to the unlimited, and therefore one would start abiding in the reality. And by that very virtue, it will be found that the reality was not, the ego was not at all present unless one gave it a reality. And that is the direct path. That is the real sadhana, if at all it has to be said, to be practiced. Therefore, Atma Vichara is the direct path given by Bhagavan for us to abide in that one reality, which alone is the immense grace of Bhagavan with which we have come to this most direct path. Let us do Atma Vichara. Whenever any limited thought rises within us, let us diligently inquire, to whom is this? Recognize it is for me. Thereupon, who am I? put the question, who am I? And the very questioning of who am I and trying to trace the source of the I thought or whatever we refer to as I, the grace will make us abide in that silence, in that expanded reality, the infinite reality. By repeated practice, Bhagavan assures that the mind will abide in the source. The grace of Bhagavan for the next 20 minutes, let us do Atma Vichara.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as the self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self manifest as Ramana, we have been sharing his answers to devotees on self-inquiry, has also been able to practice the teachings by having a session of self-inquiry. And we are now continuing in this part of the satsang to meditate on Bhagavan's teachings through his answers to Ganapati Muni and other seekers, which has been recorded by the Muni in 18 chapters in Sanskrit verse as Ramana Gita. We are now meditating on the third chapter, which is called the Mukhya Kartavya Nirupanam, the paramount duty. And Bhagavan has told Devarata, the questioner in this chapter, that the paramount duty, if one wants the highest in life, is to abide steadily in the self. And Devarata asked Bhagavan, how is one to do so? And Bhagavan pointed out that it should be done by taking thoughts away from the objects, back to the source, and remaining in that non-objective state of self-awareness. Achale nirupadhike, without any upadhis, without any attributes, not focusing on any of the attributes, but focusing only on the self through the vichara. Devarata had some subsequent questions. He wanted to know about the observances, the duties, the other duties. Should we continue the observance of other prescribed duties? And Bhagavan said, yes, certainly. Continue the observance of other prescribed duties until they drop off of their own accord. And then again, Devarata went on to question whether it is possible to attain the same state of steady self-abidance by mantra sadhana. Now, the question arises as to why Devarata should have asked thus at all. Bhagavan has given the method. He was asked, what is the method to abide in the self? And Bhagavan said, turn their thoughts back to their source and abide there. Bhagavan gave the method of Atma Vichara. But Devarata has asked this question on behalf of many of us who may be having certain predilections to follow other sadhanas. Bhagavan has never denied any sadhana. Bhagavan has always said, yes, it will take you. In Arunachala Ashtakam, Bhagavan says, O Arunachala, irundoli unai ari uruttidarkendre irundanai madantorum vida vida uruvai. It is in order to reveal your presence as that which ever is, that which is the consciousness, the Sat Chit. In order to reveal that only, you have manifest in different religions in different forms, he says. So there is a different aptitude, a different predilection, a natural tendency to move in a particular direction. Each one of us has. Because of that, we opt for different methods. Of course, if we leave it to the Sadguru, it is best. It was shared by one great sage. An instance was shared in an interaction between the Jagadguru of Sringeri, Abhinava Vidyatirtha Swami, and one of his disciples. Now that disciple had, with the instructions of the Guru, practiced saguna sadhana, that is sadhana with form and also probably with mantra japa, and the person had reached a high level of attainment in that is what is called savikalpa samadhi. It is when one gets so absorbed in that form, in the meditation on that form, that one loses consciousness of one's own form, one's own body and the environment. But it is savikalpa, because one is meditating on a form, on an object which is apart from me. So when I wake up from that meditation, I would not have thought of that object of meditation as my own self. That's the difference between saguna sadhana and a nirguna sadhana, a japa sadhana and vichara. What is the difference in japa? I always maintain my identity as the one who is doing the japa. That was what was the answer which was dealt with in the first half of today's satsang, which Dilip pointed out Bhagwan's clue to us that the ego or the identification is retained. Maybe retained with various things. We may give up some identity or the other, but then there can be the identity that I am a bhakta, that I am one who is doing japa, that my japa goes on endlessly without any break. The japa goes on of its own accord, I may say, but who is saying it? I as Sharada have to have that experience. So the Sharada entity would not have dissolved. Therefore Bhagavan says Atma Vichara is the direct means. However, this disciple of Abhinava Vidyatirtha Swami, maybe because he had heard that one must ultimately go to Nirguna Sadhana, he had a desire to start Nirguna Sadhana. But he went and asked Abhinava Vidyatirtha Swami, may I shift to Nirguna Sadhana? Will you please guide me in Nirguna Sadhana? Now the point was that the Guru had not of his own accord given him the Nirguna Sadhana. He had wanted it. Now the Guru has, according to Abhinava Vidyatirtha Swami, a dilemma over there. If one is not yet ready for a sadhana, this is a traditional way. If one is not yet ready for a sadhana, then it is better for one not to enter that realm. But what does the Sadguru do? What did he do? He says he was in a dilemma. Why the dilemma? When a disciple wants to do something, if the Sadguru says, no, don't do it, there will be disappointment in the disciple. The disciple will have a conflict. If the disciple asks the Guru, shall I do this? And the Guru says, no, don't do it, there will be a conflict in the disciple. There will be a disappointment in the disciple. There will be a conflict. So the Guru does not normally say, if he is asked, may I do this? He will not say no, unless it is totally harmful to the disciple. But there may be a harm in doing another sadhana, which is not suitable, which one is not capable of handling. Then what does the Guru do? Bhinavidyatita Swami said, I believe. At that time, the Guru has to choose the one which has less negative impact on the disciple. That's all. Both will have a negative impact because one is not ready for that sadhana. So, if one asks, the whole point of that episode was, don't ask the Sadguru. When the Sadguru says something, do this. Don't ask, may I do something else, or may I do this, or don't of your own accord go and ask, may I do this. Allow the Guru's guidance to work. Now, nonetheless, this question has been asked and it has been answered by Bhagavan. Why? Because of this very reason that for many of us, there may be a deep necessity to hold on to japa sadhana, saguna sadhana in one form or the other. For such of us, Bhagavan says, yes, hold on to it. But he gives a rider. How does he connect it to self-inquiry? How does he make it at par with self-inquiry over here? In the Ramana Gita, he says, if you do it with an unwavering mind, achanchalena manasa, mantrair japtair nirantaram. He says you should do the japa nirantara, without any break. Nirantara, antara is a gap. Nirantara is without any gap between one mantra and another. That is without any consciousness of a gap between one mantra and another. In Upadesha Saram, he calls this Ajyadhara, Sarala Chintana. So, Achanchalena Manasa, the mind should not waver. The mind should not waver. Shall I do this? Shall I do that? Shall I not do this? Shall I not do this? Would it be better for me to do this? Would it not be better? That kind of wavering should not be there. There should be full faith. There should be total faith in what one has taken up. That is important in the sadhana. There should be 100% faith. Steadfastness. Achanchala. This is what Muruganar Swami told me when he was a young girl of 13. I asked him, shall I pursue self-inquiry as my sadhana? Keeping Bhagavan as my Guru. He said, put your faith, total faith in Bhagavan and keep on doing. These two are very key instructions which Bhagavan gives in any form of sadhana. Even if it is self-inquiry, this instruction holds. It should be achanchala and it should be nirantara. It should be with full faith and it should be unbroken. What happens if one does japa sadhana in an unbroken manner? When the japa is unbroken, when there is no possibility of the mind to go to another thought, when the mind does not go to another thought but remains only with the japa, the nature of the mind itself undergoes a sea change. It becomes completely transformed. How does it become transformed? It becomes like there is an object, but it's like, the sun behind a single cloud. Look at a sun on a very, very rainy, cloudy day when you don't, there is sunlight, but sometimes it may even be dark. It may almost be like evening time, even during the day. If it's very, very cloudy, that's when our mind is clouded with many, many thoughts. But in another setting, just before the sun is setting, if there is a single cloud in front, which moves in front of the sun, then what happens is that cloud becomes very, 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 very bright. It is completely lit up by the sun. If you look at such a cloud, the experience which you get while seeing that cloud will not be of a cloud. It will be of the light itself. Because it's a single cloud and it's so permeated with the light that it gives one the experience of light, although clouded, but it gives an inkling of light and not of the clouding. So that way, when there is a single thought, that too the thought of a mantra, which is in itself an embodiment of the self, which has been turned to by many as an embodiment of the self itself, it's not just an ordinary object, it is an object imbued with the power of many people's faith. That is what makes the worship also very beautiful, because it is imbued with the power of repeated faith, of achanchala bhakti of many people. So such power the word, the nama has. And when one also puts one's entire faith in it and continuously practices it, the distractions of the mind would fall away. The necessity to think of anything else would fall away. The dependence on anything else as a source of joy would fall away. Only the beauty of the mantra would be reverberating. Such a mind, automatically what Bhagavan says is that when this happens, because the mind has turned away from all thoughts and gone into this single thought, this single focus will automatically be ultimately absorbed in the self. This may happen, or else the question may arise, automatically the inquiry may arise as to who is doing the japa. We find in Tripura Rahasyam, Parashurama, after being defeated by Rama, goes into deep depression. He is totally confused as to why he was defeated. At the same time, he has great admiration for this young Rama who could fight so excellently and defeat him, but without the least trace of turbulence, without the least trace of anger, without the least trace of any sense of doership. Rama could defeat him. And this is what amazes him. And he is roaming in the forest and he sees a jnani. But he is again amazed by the jnani. Samavarta, but he is not able to understand his state. He only says, this man in the forest is like an elephant bathing in a cool water in the midst of a forest fire. That is how much peace he is emanating. But he doesn't understand. Then he goes to Dattatreya. And Dattatreya gives him Devi Upasana. And he does Devi Upasana for many years, at which point suddenly one day the question comes to his mind. This Devi whom I am worshipping, is she apart from me? Is she also a creation of my mind? This question arises. Then he goes back to Dattatreya, who then guides him on the path of self-inquiry. So the japa sadhana, as has happened in the case of many devotees of Bhagavan, like Punjaji, who would do japa day in and day out, 24/7, incessantly. At one point when he comes to Bhagavan, and though initially Bhagavan says that the Saguna sadhana, why are you pursuing it? God should not be apart from you. God is really you. There can be no moving away and coming back to God. He is not able to accept it. But still, the very force of his japa sadhana, ultimately the japa stops of its own accord. And yet he is not able to understand. Then he comes to Bhagavan, and Bhagavan says, it has finished its task. Just as the train which brought you here and the tonga which brought you from the station have all finished their task. So ultimately, the japa finishes its task and surrenders itself to the inquiry which leads back to the self. Or else, Bhagavan says, the japa sadhana itself can be pursued as a means of inquiry, which is a method he has given to Ganapati Muni. Find out from where the source of the mantra arises. Each and every time the japa is performed, just watch it rise and watch it subside. And Vishwanatha Swami told me, do so with attention on the space which Bhagavan has indicated for the spiritual heart. That may be a concept for us. He told me it will be a concept for you to begin with, but it is a helpful concept. So watch the japa, the mantra nada rise from that spiritual, the space that is which Bhagavan has indicated on the right side of the chest. Let us watch the mantra japa rise and subside. Rise and subside. Then what happens is, without one's knowledge, every time the japa mantra subsides, where does it subside? It subsides only into the self. And one gets the anubhava of the self. But this is not conscious like in self-inquiry. That's the difference. In direct, who am I? There will be a conscious subsidence of the I into the self. Here, there is not that conscious subsidence, but the subsidence is touched every time the mantra gets back into the source. And after some time, that space would increase, and then it will automatically take one to the spurana. The spurana, which then has to be subsided into the self through the vichara. All this happens, says Bhagavan, by his infinite grace. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.
Thank you, Akka. Apara Satchit Sukhavarirashi Yasyornimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guvahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chintavihinam Hrudi Chintayami Chintavihinam Hrudi Chintayami.
Thank you, Dilip. Namo Ramana.